So, hello and welcome to the Royal Mint Experience. My name's Anne Jessup. For those people who haven't met you, welcome. I'm the Chief Exec of the Royal Mint, and I'm delighted to be here today to welcome you to the Ballot. We haven't done a ballot for over 80 years, so it's a really exciting evening. You're here in the Royal Mint Experience, which since we opened it 3 years ago, we've had 250,000 visitors actually in the Royal Mint Experience. So we're delighted to welcome you, and those people who may be watching online, please do come and visit if you can. The experience is just one part of the reinvention and growth which is taking place in the Royal Mint. And of course we produce all Britain's coinage, but there's a lot more that you may not know about. So we're the world's largest exporting mint, and we export to about 50 countries right around the world. But we also have an investment business which we started about 5 years ago, which provides precious metals for investment in lots of different ways, in bars, in coins, or in virtual precious metal. We've created a real buzz around buying coins that either celebrate, commemorate, or actually people may want to collect or gift. We've got the country's safest security deposit centre here on our site, which people may not know about. So if you've got any valuables, you may want to use our security deposit centre. And we've recently opened a gifting business which makes really beautiful precious metal gifts, most of which we're now making on site as well, and we've got some displayed over there. And of course, the reason you're here today is our collector services division. But we're not stopping there, so we're really reinventing the Royal Mint, and we want to be here in the next 1100 years, so watch this space for our new businesses. But back to today. So this is a really special day for us. As I've said, it was 80 years ago when we last had the ballot, and it's quite an unusual approach, and you might think, why did we decide to do that? But we really believe that George III's sovereign is such an important and unique coin that we wanted to ensure that there was a really fair way that people could own that coin. And of course, as you'll know, it was actually produced here, well, not here, but here in London in the Royal Mint 200 years ago, in the year that Queen Victoria was actually born. So the response we've had to the ballot has been phenomenal, not only in the UK but overseas as well, and we've had hundreds of ballot entries. And it's a real testament to the team at the Royal Mint that we could locate and verify and resurface such a precious part of British history. And our collector services division, if nobody's told you about it, we specialise in sourcing and verifying rare and historic British coins, and it's really a growing part of the Royal Mint. And we're ideally placed to advise on British coins and really to advise on their authenticity because we made every single one of them. So we're the real experts. We have some of the world's leading experts on British coinage at the Royal Mint, a really talented team. And you'll meet Chris, who's part of that team, who's going to tell you a little bit more about the history of this coin. But before that, I'm delighted to introduce Richard Madley, a renowned auctioneer, who originally comes from Cardiff. So he tells me that he actually came and looked at this site when it was a field, which was 50 years ago when the Royal Mint moved from London to Lantrisant. And he's going to be our Master of Ceremonies. So he'll lead us through the ballot. But good luck, everybody. Richard.
Actually, I won't need this tonight, I don't think, will I? No, because it's a ballot, not an auction. Thank you, Anne, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being here this evening for this really quite historic event, isn't it? Welcome all those who've travelled from far and wide, and I hope you have an enjoyable evening. We will be joined later on by many people who couldn't be here in person, who will be joining us via the internet, the world in which we live, and there'll be a live stream via YouTube. In addition to the ballot draw itself, which of course is probably the main reason why you are here, You will also have the opportunity to view some of the other historic coins that we have here at the event this evening, and to meet the experts from the Collectors Services team. But it's the live ballot draw that you'll be most interested in, I know. But in a little warm-up to it, there's going to be a talk by Chris Barker, which will take us through to about 6:45. And at 6:45, then our friends will be joining us via the internet, and they'll be joining us for the draw itself. And I'll be just explaining, welcoming them, telling them what's going to happen. And then at around about 7 o'clock, we hope, with a bit of luck, our independent ballot operators, who are, yeah, there they are in the corner, men in black there. They're going to be spinning the wheel, and that lucky number is going to be called out. So it's a bit like the lottery, but can only be one winner tonight. So that's how it's going to happen. It's now, we're at 6:30. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Chris Barker. And Chris is the research manager here at the Royal Mint Museum. If you haven't been there, it is fantastic. I am biased. I have been there a couple of times. And Chris is going to just tell us a little bit about the history of the sovereign this evening. Thanks, Chris.
Right, thank you for that. So, hopefully we should have the slides. Here we are, as if by magic. So you can see the title of the talk is 1819, The Last Sovereign, ... which, as you are all, I'm no doubt aware, completely untrue, because 1819 is certainly not the last sovereign. The very idea of that would no doubt go down very poorly with the Royal Mint itself and with many people around the world, because the sovereign is our flagship coin. And it would also be completely unfathomable for the British public in the 19th century, particularly the late 19th century, to have thought about the 1819 sovereign as being the last sovereign. Lord Randolph Churchill, who was talking about the public and the way they clung to the sovereign in the late 19th century, described it as a way that was unfathomable and mysterious. And you also had prominent publication writing in 1899 describing how every Englishman should be proud of the system of coinage which has given him a stable value. All over the world, the sovereign is a talisman that unlocks the hearts of the hardest men, which is quite some statement. And the sovereign, the end of the 19th century, really was the preeminent gold coin. It really did grease the wheels of colonial commerce as the British Empire expanded. And as a result of that, you needed branches all over the world to produce millions upon millions of gold sovereigns for daily use in trade and commerce. And these branches started in Australia and Sydney in 1855. You soon had them opening in Melbourne and Perth. You've got a branch in Canada, in Ottawa, in 1904, I think. And then you also had one in South Africa, which opened after the end of the First World War, one in India, a short-lived wartime expediency in Bombay. So these were quite considerable operations. And of the 4 branches that were operating at the start of the 20th century, made up roughly about 40% of the 100 million worth of gold sovereigns in active circulation at the start of the 20th century. And an official list of 1884 named no fewer than 36 colonies and dependencies around the globe which accepted this coin as legal tender. And in addition to that, it was a truly international coinage. You had it been accepted in places like Brazil and Portugal, which have absolutely no links to Britain or its empire. And you've got accounts of people trekking through the jungles, taking with them bags of gold sovereigns because they knew that this would be accepted around the world. And it is even rumoured that some gold sovereigns were used to pay the indemnity by the French to the Prussians at the end of the Franco-Prussian War of 1870-1871. And it found its way into popular culture as well. It's a rather nice little reference here. It says 100 jingling, tingling, golden, minted quid. And you see you've got Treasure Island there, and the image is of Robert Louis Stevenson. And that is what Robert Louis Stevenson wrote in a letter after he received news from his publisher that Treasure Island would be published. And he was being paid £100 hence his 100 jingling, tingling, golden minted quid. Other references to it in popular culture include Richard Hannay, 39 Steps. Some of you may have seen the various TV adaptations of that. But John Buchan's fictional character, who's not just the 39 Steps, there were other novels that were produced by John Buchan featuring Richard Hannay. And Richard Hannay, in the books, used it to buy shelter in places like Europe, and it's referenced when he's buying whiskey in Istanbul. He's using sovereigns to get this. And so it was much, much more to the public at the end of the 19th century than just a coin. And you really get that from this image. At first you think, what on earth am I showing you? But it does make sense, because you can see there a 1904 sovereign quite clearly, and that is the end of Blackrod's staff. Now, Blackrod is the gentleman usher of the House of Commons, the chap that walks in front of the Queen at the state opening of Parliament, and the man that bangs on the door of the Commons to gain admittance. At the end of the staff, and which is banging on the doors of Commons, is a 1904 sovereign. And that speaks volumes about how the British establishment and the British public more generally saw this coin at the start of the 20th century. It was symptomatic of the pride and the prestige associated with empire. It carried a lot of weight. However, this is all said with the benefit of hindsight. If we put ourselves back into the shoes of someone in 1819, all of this is in the future. This is unknown. This has not happened. What we have a situation in 1819 is where it's yet to achieve this prominent position in society. And to understand why I'm talking about 1819 sovereign as potentially the last sovereign, we have to do a bit of scene setting. And for that, we have to go all the way back to the Tudor period. Because this, believe it or not, is when this sovereign actually starts. It's initially struck on the orders of this gentleman, Henry VII, in 1489, and it's continued right throughout all the Tudor monarchs. And it's not until the start of the reign of James I that the sovereign disappears, ceases to be struck. You have other gold coins filling its position, being worth £1, and in the 18th century, what you have as the premier gold coin of the time in this country is the guinea. If you want to see what a guinea looks like in the room, do pop at the back, because I know Matt's got a 5 guinea piece on display at the bottom, so well worth a look. Now, at the end of the 18th century, it's the guinea that is therefore in use. And it's the guinea which is in daily use when you get the start of the Napoleonic Wars, when this gentleman, Napoleon Bonaparte, is rampaging around Europe and causing so much problems and difficulty. And Britain is involved in an extensive, long war with the French for the best part of 20-odd years. And wars are incredibly expensive. Imagine that spread out over 20 years, and you get some idea of the drain on the public purse that would be going on. That is particularly the case when you end up with events happening in this country that cause the public to fear. And that occurs in 1797, where you can see this rather unusual little drawing I've got here. And what I'm referring to there is actually the French invasion of Fishguard, which probably a lot of you have never even heard of. But this occurs in 1797. It's a wonderful story. So you get these French soldiers sent across, not very many of them, off to Fishguard to invade Wales and throw that on into England. Now, the French soldiers that are sent are the old, the sick, the infirm, prisoners dragooned into the army. They're not really all that concerned about doing a lot of invasion. So when they do actually land in Fishguard, where they tend to invade is the local pubs. And so they're very soon completely and utterly blottoed. And as a result of that, they're driven off, as you can see from this rather wonderful picture, by the local inhabitants. And particularly with the traditional Welsh dress, you can see the large sort of stovepipe hat effect going on there. They saw these hats coming across of the women, ready to chase them off, and they actually thought they were dealing with British dragoons in their sort of bearskin hats and helmets. So they drove off this French invasion. Complete and utter disaster from the French point of view, but the interesting thing is what it causes in this country. And it causes in this country an invasion fever. The public really start to fear that a French invasion is a possibility. And what that drives is it drives people to turn to their banks and try and suck out the gold from the banks. And you end up with a run on the banks. And the government has to act. It has to do something. So what the government basically does is it ceases gold cash payments. So you cannot go to your bank and get out your guineas. And instead, they initiate a system of banknotes instead of the guineas and the golden coinage. And you get £1 and £2 banknotes. And as a result of that, the guinea, during the Napoleonic Wars, pretty much disappears from circulation and active use. And there's this wonderful cartoon which really does demonstrate this. So what you're looking at here is a country banker. You can see in his local country bank somewhere around Britain. And what he's viewing with astonishment is the apparition, the ghost of a guinea. So unused is he to seeing this gold coinage in active circulation, because what he's dealing with day to day is actually banknotes. And the Times, the newspaper The Times, comments at the time that the bank's restrictions and the changes had come, as a result of these changes, had come a miserable, debased currency, the disgrace of our country in the eyes of all foreigners. And that is the state that the British currency and coinage finds itself in during the Napoleonic Wars. You have a real hodgepodge, a mess of a situation. Wars do not last forever, and obviously with the Battle of Waterloo, which is a nice painting of the Battle of Waterloo going on there, it brings peace to Europe finally. Peace for the first time in well over 30 years. And peace offers Britain an opportunity to finally reform its coinage, to change and improve what has gone before. The first part of it, it takes place at Tower Hill, which is a rather nice postcard image that you can see there. And that is where that particular sovereign will have been struck in 1819. Now, at the end of the Battle of Waterloo, 1815, 1816, the Mint has only relatively recently moved to these premises. And what you're seeing with the Mint on Tower Hill is a thoroughly modern institution. It's got rid of all of the antiquated machinery that it had at the tower, and it's got new steam-powered presses. This building is incidentally still there, the admin building. It's actually going to become the new Chinese embassy. I don't know what the Chinese will make of the Cistercian monk, which apparently haunts the building, but because it's actually built on the Cistercian abbey, but I do digress a little bit. So, firstly, they reform the silver coinage. So they call in all the old, rough, worn, disgraced silver coinage, melt it down, and issue a brand new coinage. And that's what you can see going on in this rather nice cartoon. You've got the chap of William Wellesley Pole with the shovel, who's the master of the Royal Mint, incidentally one of the brothers of the Duke of Wellington, and he's shoveling into John Bull's sack there all this new brand silver coinage. That happens in 1816, and in 1817 you get the introduction of the modern sovereign. So the sovereign as we know it today. And this is what the public would have had to get used to in the summer of 1816. Both the designs here are by a chap called Benedetto Petrucci, a very talented and gifted engraver who comes to the Mint just after the end of Waterloo. And in fact, the St. George and the Dragon design still appears on our sovereigns today, so renowned is his work on that. However, this is not an instant success. I say the public had to get used to it, and that is certainly the case. You've had a British public who have been dealing with banknotes for an awfully long time, for well over 20 years. And you've also, prior to that, had the guinea in active circulation for about 150 years. So introducing a new coin with the name sovereign, which most of the people will have no idea what it relates to, they will not have realised it was a Tudor coin originally, would be very, very unfamiliar for people. And as a result, there is a general reluctance initially to accept it, particularly in Scotland. In Scotland, they hated the new gold coinage. And you often got accounts of people saying that they'd rather accept a dirty note than a gold clean sovereign rather. And you also had them saying that they'd chase any Englishman who dared to offer a sovereign to the border rather than actually paying a banknote. A real problem as well was the drain on the gold reserve. Because in 1819, it was estimated that since October of 1818, around about 75% of the gold struck in France had come from melted down sovereigns. It's a huge proportion, equated to about £5 million at the time in gold. So having all your gold disappear off to France and be melted down into French gold coins was not ideal. And as a result of that, a gentleman called David Ricardo comes up with a new idea, a new way of maintaining the currency and backing it up. And David Ricardo is a member of Parliament, and he proposes this solution whereby instead of actually having the nation's gold reserve in your change, you would have a system of ingots, 60-ounce ingots, backing up a circulating paper currency. Each of these 60-ounce ingots would have been worth approximately £233. And what he says of this is that the use of precious metal as money was a great step forward, but it would be another improvement to banish them all together. And as a result of this, the government actually buys into his solution and his idea, and it goes into legislation, and laws are passed in 1819 to make this happen. Initially, they consider this as the 60-ounce ingot, which is like a round in many ways. It's almost still like a coin. This is a giant thing, and you can see that it's impressed with actual coin designs from the time, so people would have some familiarity with it. Unfortunately, this was very difficult to produce for the Mint, and they didn't go ahead with it. And so you're left with a much more traditional ingot, which is finally goes into use and active striking. So by the end of February 1820, around £500,000 worth of these ingots are produced by the Royal Mint, well over 2,000 of them. And they're distributed, or the idea is that they would be distributed for the banks to hold to back up their notes. And this is why that particular coin is so rare. Because in 1819, the Royal Mint is spending all its effort enacting Ricardo's idea, enacting his plan, and actually producing these ingots rather than producing gold coin. You do, however, get some gold sent to the Royal Mint to be turned into sovereigns by country banks. And that is where the 3,500-ish 1819 sovereigns actually come from. They come from gold sent to the Mint to be turned into coin. So why am I talking about 1819 being the last sovereign, and why was it not the last sovereign? Well, unfortunately for Ricardo, his plan never takes off. And you've got several reasons behind that. Firstly, the Bank of England never really bought into it. They never really wanted to go down this route. And there's several reasons behind that, but perhaps primarily the most interesting one is that the banknotes that were in use were very, very easily forged. And we know that an awfully large proportion of them were counterfeited at the time. So the Bank of England, the idea of getting rid of all these dirty notes and replacing them with a brand new coinage was a fantastic one because it reduced the problem of counterfeiting. In addition to that, the actual bars as they were sold initially were sold above the gold bullion value. So no one in their right mind was going to actually go to a bank and pay more than they should have done. As a result of that, the plan tailed off, and in 1820, you return to what was normality. So instead of producing bars, the Royal Mint once again starts to strike sovereigns in their millions. And that is where you build up that momentum to take us to the place that we saw we were at the start of this presentation. But what it does leave us with is a great rarity in the modern British coinage series. This is one of the true rarities of the British coinage. So rare that we in the museum don't actually have an 1819 sovereign. That's how rare it is. But what I want to finish on is the possibility of what might have been. Because had Ricardo's plan come off, this would have been it. What you would be buying is the last sovereign. And you're not just buying a great rarity. What you are buying is actually something that represents the possibilities of a future that was never fulfilled. Thank you very much. I'll pass back to Richard.
Thank you, Chris. That just sets the scene for this evening. It's now my pleasure to welcome those who are going to join us online. For those who are, for those joining us, we're live streaming on YouTube. We're looking good. I'm getting lots of nods from the men in black over there. Excellent. So welcome to those of our friends who are joining us from far and wide. It is for me now to just to set the scene for this evening. Forgive me if I repeat just a few of the things that Chris might have said, but it's just important that we know the process of what's going to happen this evening, because the choice made by the Royal Mint to sell this rare sovereign by ballot was not made easily, but it was seen as the fairest way of distributing it to the hundreds of people who have registered an interest in acquiring this rare coin. The Mint had held a ballot in 1935, as Anne said, so we haven't had one since. In the 1935 ballot, I think there were 25 coins, and there were over 1,000 registrants. Tonight is just one coin. There were only 3,574 of these coins struck, and now there are possibly just 10 known to exist. And as Chris says, not even the Royal Mint Museum has an 1819 sovereign. So this is a real opportunity for a collector out there. The price of £100,000 has been set to reflect the rarity of the coin and the fact that the finest 1819 sovereign achieved at auction £186,000 in 2013. That gives us just a little an idea of the pricing. So the fairest way is through a ballot. Hundreds have registered. Many will be watching, many here tonight. The winning number for the ballot will be selected via a computer-generated process that's run independently, and in a matter of a few minutes, the numbers will be announced. The first number that will appear on the screen will be the winning number. That is the first number out of the bag. There is only one winner this evening. There will, however, be 4 further numbers that we will draw, because the person who is chosen given the opportunity, to exercise their option to acquire their sovereign this evening has up to 48 hours in which to make that decision. They will be called immediately that the ballot concludes, and they have 2 days in which to make their mind up. If they choose not to, I can't see why they wouldn't, but however, they can then the second number that would be selected this evening will have the option to purchase the 1819 sovereign at £100,000. But if, in the rare event, they don't want to, then it'll go to the 3rd, 4th, or 5th number. So that's why we are drawing 5 random numbers, excuse me, this evening. But I think there's probably one that will count. So I'm just going to set the scene. Between August and November 1819, there were, as I said, 3,574 of these sovereigns struck. And these coins were destined to be rare from the outset. In 1829, the Mint, in collaboration with the Bank of England, conducted a survey of gold sovereigns in circulation to investigate how much silver was alloyed with the gold. And the Mint asked the Bank of England to locate 100 examples of each date of the sovereign then in circulation from 1817 onwards. And the bank managed to locate all that was asked for from its reserves, apart from the 1819 sovereign, of which they could only find 2 examples. Just 2 examples in 1829. So as a consequence, these 2 examples were excluded from the alloy melting experiment, though their fate is unknown. Perhaps they found their way to new collectors. Further evidence of circulation was provided by another survey carried out in 1882. This time they surveyed 105,000 sovereigns to see how they were faring, see the condition and the state of the coin. Mr. Martin sourced details on the dates and weights of sovereigns from post offices, from banks, railway stations, and anywhere else where gold sovereigns were transacted. And perhaps 100 pieces were surveyed at each clerk from each source. And of those 105,000 sovereigns, only 2 were reported from 1819. That's 63 years after their date of issue, only 2 of them. In Graham Dyer's publication, The Royal Sovereign, there is an 1819 sovereign in good fine quality, illustrated on page 44. It's this very coin. So this is indeed a rare item. And that's why you're all here this evening. You're here to take a chance to see if tonight is your night. I am therefore going to call upon the independent ballot operators who are going to conduct a randomly selected group of numbers. So the numbers have all gone in to a computer, and they're going to be mixed up, spun around. It is like Saturday night, isn't it? You've all got your tickets there. And I'm going to call out the number, the lucky number, which is preceded by 3 letters. In which case, are you ready? I'm getting nods from there. Okay. Gentlemen, let's spin the ball. And there it is. That was it. RMB 475. I don't expect you won't. There's no one jumping up here in the room who's... don't leave yet. Don't leave, because we've got a drinks reception afterwards, so I don't want you to go just yet. That is it. So wherever you are, number 475, you are the winner of the ballot. You will be telephoned within half an hour of this reception and finishing. You will then have 48 hours in which to make up your mind if you would like to exercise your option to acquire this rarest of coins. We hope you do. If, however, for some reason you don't, there's a second person, the reserve number, who will come up second. Spin RMB 705. Still haven't got anybody jumping up. I'm getting shakes to the head. There's no one here in Llantrisant this evening, but out there on the internet you could be first reserve. But don't get excited. Don't get too excited, because it could well be that the winner is going to take all tonight. So I did say that we would have a second reserve. So the second reserve number this evening is RMB 036. Number 36, a low number. You are the second reserve. You might get on the pitch. You might not. But at least you're up there. You are there. And there's still 2 more numbers to be drawn. Let's see who the third reserve is. 342. RMB 342. They're all on the internet watching at home tonight. I think that's what it is. So last but not least, now if 4 people turn down the option, number 593. 593, you are the 4th reserve. Oh, you were close. Were you close? Oh, they're all saying how close they were here, but no cigar. Right, so there they are, running off to call him. I think they're going to call him. There you are. happy number 475. So that's it. I can't announce the name. Obviously, the total confidentiality. That's all you wish for, and that's of course what we all respect. We'll be calling them now. They'll have 48 hours, otherwise reserves will be called. And that is it, really. We said that by about 7 o'clock that we would conduct and complete the ballot, and that has happened. For those guests in the room, again, I thank you very much for coming. We'd like you to stay with us this evening, where drinks and canapes will be served. Probably number 475 is probably drinking champagne already back in his ranch in California, wherever you are. But thank you very much indeed. It has been an honour to conduct a really historic ballot. And I thank you very much for attending and for participating. We knew we could only be one winner, but it has generated a huge amount of interest, which we hope here at the Royal Mint we'll be able to turn into more business for you and for us in the future. So thank you very much.